Be anywhere today, but you decided to be here. So we say thank you. My name is Marshall Arnwine. I am the legislative advocate for the ACLU California Action, and I have the extreme honor to be moderating today's special webinar event. And I just want to do a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. We could go to the next slide.
Marshall, do you mind first passing it to our interpreter so that we can get the interpretation up and running?
Yes, thank you for the reminder. So we do have an interpreter who I'm going to pass it to, who will give you instructions if you need the translation in Spanish. Off to you.
Gracias, muy buenas tardes. Entonces, gracias por unirse a esta reunión y sí tenemos interpretación al español. Soy Lía, estoy aquí con Alexia, vamos a ser las intérpretes. Entonces, si no está familiarizado con la herramienta, no está activada todavía, entonces no va a haber la opción. Pero cuando se active, si está en una computadora, verá el icono de un mapa mundi que dice interpretación en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom entre los controles. Y van a dar clic y van a seleccionar español para escuchar en español y participar. Si está en una tableta o teléfono inteligente es diferente. Entre las opciones de los controles de Zoom va a buscar este botón con 3 puntos blancos en un círculo blanco que dice más o more. Ahí da clic, va a seleccionar interpretación, de ahí seleccione español y hay que darle en finalizado o finalizar interpretación para activar el canal. En inglés es done o done. Um, so we will have interpreting. I'm not sure if there will be like Q&A portions. But if anyone is speaking Spanish, in order to listen to the English interpreting, you would choose your English channel. The tool is not turned on yet, but once it is, if you're on a computer, you'll see the icon of a globe that says interpretation among the Zoom controls. Click there and choose English. And if you're on a smartphone or tablet, you'll look for the button with the 3 dots that says more. Click there and from the menu, choose interpretation and then choose English and then choose done. Click done to activate the channel. Just a quick reminder, please keep a moderate pace while speaking. I know you have a lot of information, but keep a moderate pace so everyone can understand. And keep your mics on mute if you are not speaking to minimize background noise. Entonces, un recordatorio, por favor, que lleven un paso moderado al hablar para que todos los participantes puedan capturar, entender la información y deben, por favor, mantener apagado el micrófono si no está hablando para minimizar el ruido de fondo. Cualquier problema que tenga, si no encuentra o ve los botones, por favor, díganos, puede decir algo en el chat, les podemos ayudar. ¿Sí? Y ahora se va a activar. So we can go ahead and turn that on now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leah. So here is our agenda and roadmap for today. We're going to talk about our current context for starters, and then we're going to quickly pivot to a bright California budget justice future and talk about why we need AB 1165, the California Housing Justice Act. After that, we're going to talk about budget deeper dives, both on the housing and homelessness front, and also about healthcare, because they both are very important to talk about. After that, we will transition to 2026 elections and explain some important things that's going on there. And then we'll delve into calls to actions, what you can do to help push this agenda forward together. And then last but not least, we will end with the Q&A because we want to hear from you. We're here in community, we want to learn what's on your minds, and we will do the best to our abilities to answer any questions that you may have. Next slide, please. So now I have the extreme honor to hand this section over, the current context, housing, homelessness, to my dear colleague, Angelina Corsani.
Thank you, Marshall. So we're here today to talk about AB 1165, which is a really important bill that asks the state to figure out how it will address the state's housing affordability and homelessness crisis. So AB 1165 is a really important bill. And as we head into the next legislative session and the bill is reintroduced, we wanted to spend some time just reminding everyone and re-energizing us all around why this bill is so important. I'm going to give a very quick high-level grounding of our current context and why this bill is so important in this moment. And then Alex will give a more detailed explanation of our bill and where it's at right now. The most important thing to keep in mind is that the high rates of homelessness and the unaffordability of housing that we're seeing right now are not because of the myths that we all hear or the lies and disinformation that are often spread about this topic. So housing is not expensive because California is a nice place to live and everyone wants to be here. And it's not because the cost of the construction materials is high either. Housing affordability and homelessness are policy problems. These are government-created problems that require a government-funded solution. Right now, most of us are experiencing, have experienced, or know someone who's experiencing skyrocketing rent prices. So more than half of renters in California, a majority, are rent burdened, meaning we spend more than 30% of our income on rent. The American dream of buying a home is increasingly inaccessible. So the average price of houses that sold in our state in 2025, the first quarter, was about $1 million. That's why California has one of the lowest home ownership rates in the country. And what's less talked about is that 99% of us don't have the same quality of life that we used to. We used to be able to pay for housing and have money left over to do fun things and put money towards retirement and towards savings. For most working people, that used to be attainable, but now for most working people, we pay for housing and other basic needs and have a fraction of what we once did left over. So the record-breaking rates of homelessness should come as no surprise. With the rising housing costs, while wages have stayed the same, many people are living paycheck to paycheck, and more people are being driven into homelessness than ever before. On top of that, support from critical programs is increasingly unattainable. Just to give one example, here where I am in San Diego, our waiting list for Section 8 is 15 years long. And all of this context disproportionately impacts people of color, because people of color, and particularly Black and Indigenous people, are more likely to experience higher rates of being unhoused, higher rates of eviction, and new rates of home ownership are lower among these communities as well. And not to mention that access to safe and stable housing is a key social determinant of health. So this is the reality that we're living in, and our current federal administration is only making it worse through massive cuts in federal funding to our states. So it is absolutely essential that we protect ourselves here in California and hold our elected officials accountable to investing our state resources in the solutions that align with our priorities and what we think is most important, starting with finding a way to ensure affordable housing for everyone. And with that, I will pass it to Alex.
Thanks, Angelina. My name is Alex Visotsky. I am with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I lead our California policy work. I'm just going to talk about one of the tools and really want to emphasize that this legislation is just one of many tools to try and address our affordability crisis in California. So I'll talk about where this bill, AB 1165, is at, what the bill does, and why it's a critical vehicle, even with some changes that we're making to the bill to ensure it can continue to move forward. The bill, in short, requires the state to start planning for the actual needs of Californians when it comes to housing affordability and homelessness. As others are going to share later in this call, we have a state government that has treated responding to the housing crisis as a nice thing to do, not a thing that they need to do, right? When we have extra money lying around in the state budget, when we find some extra change in the couch cushions, the state has added money to housing programs. As opposed to, education or transportation or firefighting, which the state funds every year with consistency. This seems backwards to me, right? None of us get to decide to skip paying our rent one month and tell our landlord, hey, I'll throw you some money when I'm doing better, when I have extra cash lying around, right? The rent eats first, people forego buying groceries, getting the healthcare they need, and buying school supplies for their kids so they can pay the rent and keep a roof over their head. So why isn't the state treating housing with that same alacrity, right? Investing in the affordability of our housing as a core part of the budget. This bill is trying to change that. It's trying to keep that conversation about the state's need to invest in housing and making housing affordable be consistent. Every year, every budget, we need to see robust state investment in affordability of housing and homeless services, just like how we have to figure out how to fit housing into our budget every month. Um, so the bill is currently sitting, it's a 2-year bill. Right now, we're in the middle of a 2-year session at the state where 2025, a whole crop of bills were introduced. Some of them made it through, some of them were signed, some of them did not. Those bills that didn't make it all the way through continue to kind of move forward. So, and they have a very short time frame to do that. So the bill right now is headed to the Assembly Appropriations Committee. It has a very short deadline to be able to make it through appropriations. We essentially have until the end of January to make it through appropriations and then move through the Assembly floor and move on to the state Senate if we're going to keep this bill alive. And then again, the purpose of this bill, right, is about messaging to our state that we need that consistency of state funding. It's about having a vehicle to be able to show up in our state lawmakers' offices and tell them why housing affordability and homelessness needs to be a top priority for them and why actually funding it and not just doing kind of little bills that nibble at the margins has to be a top priority for them. And through that organizing, through that messaging, it's intended to really build momentum for future revenue campaigns. So if I can go to the next slide, please. And so that's some of the strategies that we are taking on with this bill, right? We want to build support for the bill as it is. We want to build public awareness and legislative awareness of the need for ongoing funding. And you're going to hear today how much the state is actually investing in housing and homelessness versus how much we actually need to invest. So part of this bill is about just getting that message to all of our legislators, helping them understand where the investment is versus where it needs to be. And it's also by pushing that message, pushing that support, this is going to be a higher issue, a top issue on the agenda of whomever is our next governor. So you're also going to hear about that today. Next slide, please. Just to get a little bit in the weeds, as I mentioned, so you're aware of what the timeline is that we're working under. Because this is a 2-year bill, it has to move through the Assembly quickly, right? We have until the end of January to move this bill through. And then we have a little more time to work on the Senate. Then we have basically the entirety of the spring to move this bill through its Senate policy committees. We have until the end of August to get it through the entire Senate. So that's a good chunk of 7 months to really work with our senators and really raise the issue and put it top of mind for them. And then you'll hear more about the kind of federal elections that are coming down the pike. And then the beginning of 2027, January 2027, that's when we can then introduce new measures, including things like revenue measures. Next slide, please. So the current version of the bill, what it does as introduced, it requires the state to create a housing justice fund and fund the solutions at the scale needed to solve housing affordability and homelessness. It requires the state to create the plan to determine how much money is needed and how and what options there are to fund these solutions at the scale they're needed. And it requires the state to put forward annual performance metrics on how to address housing affordability and homelessness. That first piece of the bill, the requiring the state to fund the solutions at scale, right? That is currently the stumbling block and what's going to keep the bill potentially from not moving forward out of Assembly Appropriations Committee, right? Because that requires the state to suddenly increase its investment by more than 10 times what it currently does without having established a new revenue source to do that. So because we want to ensure that this bill puts the message forward, keeps the message front and center for our legislators, if next slide, please, that small piece of the bill is that major piece of the bill is coming out for the time being, right? Until we actually develop the momentum, until we develop the coalition strength and the organizing strength to be able to put forward a revenue source to actually back that up. Right now, we're not there yet. But the bill, what the bill will still do is create a plan and force the state to create a plan to say, this is how much is needed to actually address our housing crisis, and this is how we're going to potentially come up with the money. And it will continue to make force the state to come up with statewide performance metrics on how we're actually doing when it comes to addressing housing affordability and homelessness. So our legislators can't just say, well, I did this, this, and that on homelessness, and I did this, and that on housing affordability. No, we need one place where the state says, here's the metrics on how we're doing, and we can always point back to that. So I will pass the baton now to my colleague Sharon, who's going to get a little bit deeper on the budget around housing and homelessness.
Thanks so much, Alex. Hi, my name is Sharon Report, and I'm with the Corporation for Supportive Housing. We're a national nonprofit, and I too work on state policy around homelessness. Next slide, please. So right now, the state is investing less than 0.5% of the state budget on housing and homelessness. And of that amount, a very small portion is invested in ongoing funding, which is what we really need. As Alex mentioned, in our personal lives, we can't say we'll pay the rent when we have extra, change under the cushion. So we really need ongoing funding to be a reliable funding source for housing and homelessness. If we actually wanted to solve homelessness, it would only take 2.7% of investment from the state to solve homelessness. If we wanted to solve our affordable housing problem, we really need to know, like, how much would it take to solve affordable housing crisis in California? Next slide, please. So right now the state has goals. It actually has set a goal of creating 1 million new affordable homes. It also has goals around achieving certain benchmarks around homelessness. But we really can't achieve those goals unless the state is willing to determine how much would it take to achieve those goals in state funding and local funding and federal funding. It also would need to use data to assess how that money should be invested. And then it would need to work with partners, with other state agencies, local government, and stakeholders who have interest in and investment in and expertise in solving homelessness, including people with lived experience. Simply, the state cannot actually meet its targets until it's decided and really use data to determine those factors. Next slide, please. As California faces budget deficits, though, we've actually seen our state policymakers move away from investments in housing and homelessness. So the governor of the last couple of years has actually proposed in his January budget proposal $0 for affordable housing and homelessness programs. And we do expect that that may happen again this year. Next slide. Unfortunately, this year we're also facing, as was mentioned before, federal policy decisions that will dramatically impact our funding for homelessness programs and affordable housing programs. Specifically, the Trump administration has changed policies around homeless continuum of care programs. That will mean that about 27,000 Californians may return to homelessness. They would be at very high risk of becoming homeless again. Similarly, Congress has decided not to invest in emergency housing vouchers, which is currently housing 15,000 Californians who are either fleeing domestic violence or experiencing homelessness. And of course, that population will be at severe risk of returning to homelessness as well. So as a result of those cuts, we are worried that homelessness will dramatically increase in California in the near future. Next slide, please. So to the extent that that legislators and the governor here in California are making any decisions around affordable housing and homelessness policy, we know that they are driving our failure to react to to those crises of affordable housing and homelessness crisis. The only long-term fix is really to invest in a permanent, ongoing source of funding that can fund our affordable housing and homelessness programs. Without that long-term commitment and ongoing resources at the scale of need, then we will continue to see this crisis. AB 1165 is really the first step to getting us to solutions. I'm now going to pass the ball to Amanda.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. Hi, everyone. Amanda McAllister-Wallner. I'm the Executive Director with Health Access. We are California's Health Consumer Advocacy Coalition, working for quality, affordable healthcare for all Californians. You may be thinking, this is a housing webinar. Why is this healthcare lady here? Um, it's really, I'm really here to give a little bit of context for the larger budget situation um, uh, that the coalition is working to advance housing policy in. And healthcare makes up a significant portion of our state budget and our state funding, both in terms of funding coming in from the federal government, as well as state spending on health and human services. And so I want to talk a little bit about how the state healthcare funding landscape is changing. So as I'm sure all of you are aware, this past summer, Republicans in Congress and the Trump administration made the biggest healthcare cut and corporate tax break in American history with HR 1. It was signed on the 4th of July. It will lead to drastic holes in our healthcare funding. The biggest redistribution of wealth from low-income Americans to the highest income Americans and the highest earners in the country that we've ever seen. Cutting nearly $1 trillion from healthcare over the course of the next 10 years. The biggest place that those cuts came from was from Medicaid. Here in California, we call it Medi-Cal. That is the low-income healthcare program that was expanded through the Affordable Care Act to cover all low-income people, including low-income adults. And in California, it covers about 1/3 of the population. About 15 million Californians are on Medi-Cal. Provides essential healthcare coverage to children, to pregnant individuals, seniors, and people with disabilities. Half of all births in the state are covered by Medi-Cal. Half of all children in the state are covered by Medi-Cal. Importance of Medi-Cal in communities really does vary across the state. For instance, in some parts of the Central Valley, more like 2/3 of people are on Medi-Cal, upwards of 90% of kids are covered by Medi-Cal. So this really does vary from community to community, in terms of what's covered. Of that $1 trillion cut to healthcare that we saw in HR 1, that translates into about a $30 billion cut just here in California to healthcare funding. Next slide. So what does this mean for Californians who currently rely on Medi-Cal or on state healthcare programs? The Newsom administration released some estimates about what the impact of HR 1 could be. And their estimates show that up to 3.4 million people could lose Medi-Cal coverage. A lot of this depends on what decisions the state makes to implement HR 1, because there is some freedom. However, when we're talking a $30 billion hole, There are mostly a lot of bad choices, I think, from our perspective, that will lead to potentially people losing coverage and less generous coverage, potentially pulling back on optional benefits, pulling back on some of the innovations that California has really adopted to um, make our Medi-Cal system, incredibly robust. Things like, how else can we help low-income families, covering the cost of diapers in Medi-Cal, providing wraparound services for people experiencing homelessness, including support with housing placement. All of these innovations that we've really been able to leverage the Medi-Cal program to to support low-income Californians are on the line. Um, in addition to the cuts to Medi-Cal, um, due to federal inaction, we are likely looking at, um, we are also looking at a loss in um, premiums that support people who buy their health insurance through Covered California. Many Californians will see their premiums double, and as many as 400,000 will lose coverage altogether. Next slide. So the reason that uh the Francisco invited me to speak is because, again, more than a third of our state budget is dedicated to health and human services. And a federal cut of this magnitude will force reductions in other areas, including education, housing, and transportation, in order to make up for these significant cuts. And so, I think we are very much all in this fight together to protect the investment in low-income Californians and to push the state to not balance the budget on the backs of our most vulnerable Californians. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, there is some flexibility in how state lawmakers will decide to implement HR 1 and will decide to balance the budget. The LAO recently released a report that projects an $18 billion deficit just in 2026, with an ongoing structural budget deficit that, legislators are going to have to grapple with how to adjust, and our next governor will have to grapple with, how to fill those and address those structural challenges in the state budget. Health Access is advocating that state lawmakers stand up for California values and ensure access to care for all Californians, to not go back on the promises of universal coverage that we've made. And to help help all Californians stay healthy, keep kids in school, and make sure that parents are able to earn a living wage to support their families. Next slide. I think we are fighting an uphill battle here. We saw with the budget deficit last year that state lawmakers, rather than pushing for the wealthiest Californians to pitch in to prevent these cuts, they went and attacked healthcare for immigrant communities. We certainly have an uphill battle in order to protect access to healthcare over this next year, and to push our decision makers um, to not look at balancing the budget on the backs of the most vulnerable. Next slide. Um, which is why we are really, looking with partners at ways to for the state to generate new revenue sources that can be a sustainable source of funding for our safety net, including for healthcare, including for housing, including for all of the pieces of our safety net that help people stay healthy, stay housed when they're struggling. And that work is being done through our Fight for Our Health campaign, and I'm happy to share information about how to follow along with that work in the chat. Next slide. I think that might be my last one. Yeah, so I will go ahead and pass it back.
I'll take it from here. Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Davalos. I am a senior policy analyst with the California Budget and Policy Center. And so my remarks really will build off of Amanda's and really looking ahead at the state budget next year. Next slide, please. So just some key points I really wanted to highlight for you all for the broader context. Right, we all know that our budget is the key to a thriving California. And as Amanda just said, really raising significant ongoing state revenue would make bold action possible to continue funding homelessness and housing solutions, but also try to mitigate some of the harms to Medi-Cal and SNAP and many other programs that we're seeing coming down the line because of the Trump administration and congressional Republicans from HR 1 and even beyond that through the federal appropriations process that we're gonna see. And as mentioned, California has been facing some budget deficits over the last couple of years and projected into the next couple of years, which are pretty, significant. And one thing to really take note, though, is that when policymakers were even crafting this year's budget, they really weren't taking into account a lot of the harmful changes that California is going to be seeing from HR 1. So the cuts that we saw this year to undocumented communities across the state, primarily through Medi-Cal, this was before accounting to some of the budget implications from the federal government. And this was despite the fact that as soon as we knew Trump was elected, that a lot of harmful things were going to come to states. But even then, this year's budget didn't include any new major tax policy changes to help close the deficit we were facing, to help avoid spending cuts that we saw, and really buffer against federal cuts that we knew were coming. And this is especially critical as we go into next year because we know the needs of our communities just continue to grow, but also because state leaders have largely exhausted other tactics and within our budget to prevent some of the deep cuts that we could possibly see. But at this point, what's really on the table and the option before the legislature is the need to raise new revenues because there's just not much left that we can do at this point. And our reserves, while we still have some funds in reserves, as we look at long term and as we look at the current needs of our communities, that's not enough. And even within the legislative analyst office, kind of analysis that they put out, so they forecasted the deficit that California will be facing. They even mentioned that at this point, the state either needs to increase our revenues or we need to cut our spending because where we're at now is it's leaving a problem for our communities. And while I will say that even the LAO is advising the legislature to not commit to any new commitments for spending, we know that that reality is not possible in our California because of the need that we have currently. And so one way that the Budget Center is trying to position us, one of the main recommendations we have could be potentially, yes, thank you. The LAO is the Legislative Analyst Office. They are kind of the main fiscal body that helps provide recommendations to our state legislature on how to proceed on certain things. But one of the main revenue options that we look toward is closing corporate tax loopholes could be a starting point for new revenues. As Amanda mentioned, HR 1 created the deepest cuts to Medicaid and SNAP in US history, and that was to fund tax breaks for the already wealthy and very wealthy corporations. And one of the reasons why we know it could it makes sense to target corporations is because they have received federal massive tax cuts. And profit corporations have already saved billions, even from the first Trump administration, when a lot of tax breaks were also enacted then. But even when we look at the most profitable corporations in California currently, what they pay in state taxes is less than 0.1% of their total expenses. So even if we marginally increase what they're paying in California state taxes, it's really a drop in the bucket to help to try to claw back some of those resources that we desperately need for our communities, currently and really going into the future in the landscape that we're facing. But with that, I'll now turn it over back to Francisco, I believe.
Thank you so much, Monica, Amanda, and Sharon. I feel like this is such rich information, and we're so excited to that folks are here with us to be able to move these forward, these campaigns forward. So the final um, sort of landscape, you know, uh, dynamic that we wanted to share with folks was the election that is coming up in 2026. Because one, affordability is probably going to be a big issue. We need to make sure housing and health are big issues there. We will have a new governor be elected, a new treasurer. Both of those are very pivotal. Elected officials in particular for housing. But then more broadly, in terms of our state legislature, we will have all of the assembly members up for re-election, and I'm pretty sure it's half of the Senate will be up for re-election in 2026. So from our coalition, my name is Francisco. I apologize, I didn't introduce myself, with a statewide housing justice advocacy coalition called Housing Now. We really think we need to make sure budget justice and new revenue, in particular, as part of that budget justice, is central to the conversations around this election, right? It needs to be part of that political agenda that we are all talking about. And so one of the things we are asking ourselves, and as a coalition, we are asking our coalition partners, is do you participate in candidate forums? Do you host candidate forums? Or do you put out candidate questionnaires? These are things that 501c3 organizations as well as 501c4 organizations can do. The difference there between those is that the 501c4s can be a little bit more political and do a lot more, do some more lobbying. But in general, if you are a charitable nonprofit under these tax rules, you have an ability to engage and educate your community about the issues and about the importance of participating in their local elections. So one other potential activity that as a coalition we are exploring and getting a sense from our coalition partners is how much civic engagement they already do. Do they incorporate it into their own events, their own town halls? How do we make sure more of our community is showing up at the ballot? And we could also be doing direct canvassing or voter registration. And just to say, the elections and the what we talk about when we talk about the elections are going to be important in terms of who gets elected and how are they, what will be the measuring stick that folks want to see of those candidates. And so I'm hoping that we can make sure housing and health are priority in those conversations. Next slide. One additional dynamic that happens with elections in California in particular is that we have ballot initiatives that are, as electorate, we are asked to vote on yes or no. So this is just a quick rundown for educational purposes only. And I say that because as a coalition, my coalition will take a position eventually on, some of these various ballot initiatives that might be on the ballot. At this point, the one we are very much championing is and hoping gets to make it onto the ballot is a bond for affordable housing. That's something our coalition partners and allies have been working on for a couple of years. But there might be some additional ballot initiatives on the ballot that we thought it made sense to put on folks' radar as we are assessing how we get to a justice future for California. So in general, if folks would like to put a ballot initiative on proposition on the ballot, and it's coming from the community, it's coming from the electorate, then they have to file it with the Secretary of State. And so we do have, and though that's public, so we do have a sense of what has been filed with them. The other way that this happens is the legislature can also pass something and then it goes on the ballot. That's how the housing bond would get on the ballot this 2026. So from our coalition's perspectives, there are folks that are trying to win more money for the state budget, and there are also some folks that are trying to make it harder for the state to raise more money. So in last year, in 2024, there was ballot initiative that had been proposed that would have made municipal fees require a 2/3 vote to pass. And so we hear that that might be again proposed this year. It has been filed with Secretary of State, and there are collecting signatures for at least 2 or 3 versions of that proposition. We've also heard that teachers' unions are exploring a renewal of a millionaire's tax that was already in our state budget. California has a minimum funding for education, and that was funded over a decade ago through a millionaire's tax, and it is sunsetting in 2030. And so folks are exploring how do we make sure that we don't lose that funding as well. Another one of our healthcare union allies that represents folks working in healthcare union are proposing a tax. I think that one is in particular excessive CEO fees. I might be getting my policy tax mixed up there. Folks can correct me in the chat if I'm getting it wrong, but it is the idea is that it's dedicated to mitigate some of these particular healthcare cuts from the federal government. And then just additional potential ballots that might be coming down at the city or your county. They could also be proposing efforts to bring in new revenue, and that, different places might be moving those forward across the state. And then at the same time, the ballot is not the only way that we can secure additional revenue. You could also do it through the legislature. And so we may be seeing additional bills from the legislature to identify and bring new revenue for the state and the state general budget. So that's just a little bit of additional dynamics that we need to keep in mind as we explore on chart a stronger budget justice future for California. Let me turn it back to Marshall.
Thanks, Francisco. Rashida, I'd like to invite you to our call to action, please.
Absolutely. You can switch to the next slide, please. So yeah, everyone, this is the moment where we shift from information. We threw a lot of very valuable and heavy information at you guys to action. And so I'm going to just share some of our calls to action, some of the things that you all can do over the next 30 to 60 days as we move our campaign forward. And there's something you can do right now, which is scan this QR code with your phone, if you have a free phone, to sign up to endorse the Housing Justice Act if you haven't yet. So now is the time. If you have endorsed it already, please make it loud, right? Share it on social media, include it in your newsletters, let your networks know that you're part of this fight. And, just keep in mind, especially as you're sharing the word, that AB 1165, the Housing Justice Act, is our vehicle, but really the fight is for revenue and budget justice, as well as California's commitment to long-term at-scale funding for housing. Next slide, please. And this means joining other coordinated statewide budget sign-on letters, being able to show up for collective calls that are led by partners who are deep in the state budget and federal funding space. Some of the partners who you heard on this call today. So just keep pushing out that message, right? That housing is infrastructure and California has to invest accordingly. We also need help with co-author outreach. We need you this month, right? You saw the timeline that Alex shared earlier. Our number one priority between now and early January is securing new co-authors for AB 1165. And we'll try to make it as easy as possible for you all. So you'll get, after this webinar, you'll get a follow-up with a sample email, some type of template that you can use to reach out to assembly members. And if you're part of an organization, you can help activate your staff and your members. And even if you're an individual, your outreach also matters. So please contact your legislator. And then the last call to action that I'll share, and I think Francisco has a poll for us to fill out to indicate how you might be able to contribute. But just as you heard from Francisco, right, 2020 elections, we have to start shaping that narrative now. And so the leaders who are going to be elected in next year will determine whether California funds housing at the scale required. And so that work is going to start today. And so we're asking you to bring candidate questions into your forums, voter guides, start those conversations, ask candidates for governor, the legislator, right? Are you going to champion ongoing at-scale revenue for housing and homelessness solutions? So we'll have some sample questions that we can share. And just remember, right, when we shape the questions, we shape the race, and that ultimately shapes the policy. So here's the poll. If you have some ways that you can contribute, let us know what you're interested in doing, how you can support these efforts. And again, if you also go to the next slide, we'll throw that QR code back up. And you will be able to sign up to endorse AB 1165. And also there's emails on the side. So if you have questions about endorsing, please make sure to reach out to Kath or to Alex or to any of us if you have more questions about how you can get involved with AB 1165. So with that, I will pass it back to Marshall to open up for Q&A.
Oh my goodness, that was a master class on fighting for California's budget justice future. May we give all of our presenters, panelists, a great thank you in the chat. Let's put some hand claps in the chat, heart emojis, text your friends, let them know they missed today's webinar. But don't fret, we will send out these slides. This has been recorded, and this was just a phenomenal, phenomenal webinar. Thank you to all the presenters that presented on today. But now we want to hear from you all. Let's do question and answers. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand and we would love to hear from you, or you could simply put it in the chat as well. And just remember, this is recorded. All right, Zach.
Yeah, I have a question, perhaps for Monica, but other panelists as well. I really appreciated the point about all the corporate taxes that have been saved because of Trump era one tax breaks. And I'm just wondering how we overcome, perhaps this is with a new governor, but how we overcome Newsom's argument around, even if we are to recoup some of those taxes, that it makes California less competitive than Texas or other places that maybe already have a lower corporate tax rate, but also aren't recouping what's been saved on the federal side.
I think I can start, and if there's other panelists want to jump in. I do think there's a lot of narrative work to be done around that, and it's a lot of, quite frankly, there's a lot of fear mongering when it comes around taxes and things like that. But when we look at the data, there's a reason why a lot of businesses do business in California, right? And regardless, even if they move their headquarters, like they're still going to have to pay California taxes on the services and goods they sell and the business they do in the state. So that's like kind of the main workaround there. But even to your point, like I will say from the budget centers kind of work, and we're working with partners to bring more folks into the conversation and with narrative points, but there's more we can do. And just because there's very powerful business interest groups and anti-tax groups right now that have gained a lot of momentum, it shouldn't mean that we back away from doing what's needed for our communities and to prevent some of these really deep cuts. And even with homelessness and housing, right, it's something that's been long underfunded. And we shouldn't, and we can look toward our state leaders to try to create some tax equity and tax fairness within our system right now.
Just to add to that a little bit too, I totally agree with everything, Monica, you shared. And, when we think about Medi-Cal, right, this is it's corporate welfare. The reason that people are on Medi-Cal, by and large, most people in Medi-Cal are working. The reason that people are on Medi-Cal is because they're being paid, below living wages, and their job is not providing health insurance for them. And so the state is coming in and subsidizing these corporations. And I think there's corporate responsibility aspect to this work that I think we can really, we can and should really like exploit and look at. And I would say also, you know, California is the fourth largest economy in the world. People want to do business here because this is where the people are. We have great schools, we have a great market, and I think, as Monica said, right, there are ways to do this that will maintain California's competitive edge, that helped us become the fourth largest economy in the world. But also, the fourth largest economy in the world should absolutely have a robust safety net. It's unacceptable that it wouldn't. For a state with this much wealth to not be taking care of people is unacceptable. And I think that's really the message too.
Thank you, Amanda, Monica. Alex, do you have a response to the question as well?
Yeah, I did. I mean, there's a perception out there that of California being this very high tax state, right? And in some cases, it is, right? We pay a lot of sales tax. We pay a lot of, other kind of small taxes that fall hard on individuals and on individual consumers. And the reason we do that is because these other places aren't paying their fair share. Corporations are not paying their fair share. It happens because commercial property taxes are artificially low, because taxes on property are artificially low. So it's actually a low tax state in some of these other areas. It's just that we are really hurting regular people as like this workaround because we don't want to tax the powerful interests in our state.
Thank you, Alex. We have about 4 more minutes. Anyone else have any questions for any of the panelists for anything that you heard today? AB 1165, budget around housing, homelessness, healthcare, 2026 elections, call to action of how you can help.
There's a
Marshall,
hand raised,
yeah.
Sabrina.
Oh, go for it. Thank you.
Thank you. From the list of options for increasing revenue that was on a previous slide, can you talk about what vote is needed to get them passed? Because I know some things in the legislature require 2/3 vote, and then if it's a proposition, is it just 50% plus one? What's kind of the different pathways who do we need to get on board to get these revenue solutions enacted?
Alex,
Yeah,
was this your slide?
I think somebody else started chiming in, and I'll jump in afterwards.
I could chime in. Oh, Monica is better to answer this. Go ahead,
I
Monica.
was just going to quickly say on the legislative side, so any tax increase or perceived tax increase requires a 2/3 vote.
Thank you, Monica. I was going to add, I do think there's this perception that it has to go to the voters, and it actually does not, because as Monica said, the legislature can pass tax increase. But it is it's a high bar to get through the legislature, which is why we need all hands on deck to get it passed.
And then when it comes to ballot initiatives, there is a distinction that the California Supreme Court has ruled that taxes are different than fees. And when they are coming from the citizens, ballot initiatives process, and taxes do require still the 2/3 vote of the electorate to pass, but fees do not. And that is why, we have for example, city or county of LA, they were able to pass the Measure ULA, the mansion tax, with just 50% plus one vote. So it depends on sort of how it's written and what it's categorized as. But that's a really good question.
Francisco, do you mind if I amend that?
Absolutely. Go for it, Mari. And if you don't mind introducing yourself, just so that folks know.
Hi, everybody. Masti Manji, Inner City Law Center. There's a difference here. So Francisco mentioned Measure ULA. There was a recent tax ruling that allows voters to put a ballot initiative to get signatures, gather signatures, and put a tax on the ballot for local taxes as well as state taxes. On the ballot, if a voter puts it on the ballot, it's 51%. If it's on the state ballot, it's always 51%. If it's on a local ballot, but it was put on by a local government rather than by the people, requires 2/3 majority. Fees always require 51% at the state level.
Thank you, Mari. Appreciate it. But that was a really good question from Sabrina in terms of trying to think about the strategic, right? What is the strategic opportunity here for some of these various different options? Yep. Mari, would love to. Sabrina's asking, is there a place that captures that information in an easy, handy way?
I can look around and see if there's anything I can find and send it. I'll send it to you, Francisco.
Thank you. And any resources folks would like, we can also send them out to everybody that's joined us today. We've got your email. Thanks.
Folks, I'm sure we wouldn't stay here all day, but it is 1 o'clock and I need to respect your time. So before we end, I do want to say a huge thank you to each and every one of you that participated on today. We will make sure that you all get the slides. And if you have any questions around how to endorse the California Housing Justice Act, AB 1165, Kath Rogers' email is there, and Alex as well. And we would love to partner with you to move AB 1165 to the finish line. We would love to partner with you just in general to continue to fight for a better budget justice future, both on the healthcare front and the housing and homelessness front. So with that, thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate you, and we hope that you have a phenomenal rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Great job, everybody.